Welcome back, everyone, to the Virtual Cafe Summer Speaker Series. Today, I am joined by Kristine Slater, one of the Pole Physio team members. Welcome, Kristine.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
So excited to have you. Cheers. Little
Cheers.
coffee mug. Oh, how cute is that one? You're
Yes.
just on the download secretly rating everyone's coffee mugs, and that's up there for me. I love a good little we can do it. Stronghold. Yes. Yes. Look at the guns. Love it. So Kristine's one of our physios on the Pole Physio team, and she assists the Pole Physio team by helping us with our content creation through blog writing and post creation. So Kristine is a very important member of our team, helping to spread all the wonderful information and disseminate across the world. So thank you so much, Kristine, for being a part of our team. We appreciate you, and I
Yeah.
appreciate your time. Yeah, I appreciate your time here today. So today we're going to be chatting from a physio point of view about wrist pain in pole. So I wanted to kind of just kick it off by chatting about anatomy very briefly and going through kind of the basics of the wrist. Is that okay with you?
Sounds good.
Right. Let me bring up a picture of it. Did you want to talk through, and I can use my cursor to help people at home, just very basic anatomy of what we need to be aware of as a pole dancer when it comes to our wrist?
Yeah. So the wrist actually looks quite complicated when you look at it from this view. There are so many little bones and tendon and ligaments, soft tissue that keep everything together. So what gets complicated is understanding how they all integrate together. But really, the importance is the strength that we need to help support all those structures.
Yeah, it does look super complicated when you first look at it, right? And at the end of the day, every bone of the forearm and the wrist, they have a purpose, and the ligaments they basically connect into each other. And so whilst this picture looks so nice and neat, when you actually look at, sorry, it's a bit gross to start with a cadaver, so when we do dissection, it doesn't look anything like this. It's just basically a whole bunch of ligaments that form and mesh into each other, and they provide a lot of passive support to the wrist. So if you ever hear us talk about passive support, when we're talking about that today, we're referring to how the bones sit into other bones and how the ligaments connect the bones together. Yeah. So we're not going to go into super in-depth anatomy because it's not really the point of today, but just so you have a visual of what the wrist looks like. So I was going to say these are the important things to see, is that you've got your two forearm bones and all your wrist bones, and then your digits that come out, all supported by the ligaments. And then if I bring up another picture that shows the anatomy of the muscles. Sorry, this is a bit of a poorer quality picture for those at home. There's also a lot going on here, isn't there, Kristine?
Yeah, definitely looks overwhelming. What's easy to break it down into is thinking about the palm side of the hand and the back of the hand, or the dorsum side, and think about how on the palmar side you have all your flexors of your wrists. So there's actually several in there. You can probably see the lines that kind of indicate that's each one a muscle, the white bit being like the tendons. And so they all attach way up into the fingers. So what we forget is a lot of our muscles that, create the control around our hand, the movements around our hand and fingers, actually originate in the forearm. So like I was saying a moment ago, if you think about the palm side, that's a lot of your flexors. So those are the ones that are going to create that grip and like a fist. And on the dorsum side, the back of the hand, is going to be all your extensor muscles.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, exactly like you said, a lot of these muscles, well, all of these muscles pretty much originate from the forearm, and a lot of them actually come up from the elbow. So there's a common extensor origin, so where most of the extensor muscles originate from, and then there's also the common flexor origin as well. So those two areas then help give birth to all the different muscles that supply all the strength of the forearm and wrist area. And I think what you said before, in terms of the flexors and extensors. So we've got the flexors create that grip strength and our extensors create the opening strength. I think that's really important to know, because when we talk about active strength or active support, that's what we're referring to. And on the pole, we use a lot of our grip strength, but a lot of the times when I see someone try to grip, the thing that actually helps to assist it are the extensor muscles. So they have to work together, these two groups. So whilst the flexors themselves are doing the grip, they need a lot of strength, the extensors are supporting it to make sure that there's not any undue shearing force happening around the wrist itself. So we don't want to get any more complicated on that for people in terms of anatomy today, because trust me, there's a lot that goes into a wrist, and we've simplified it there just for ease. But I think that's probably the most important thing that people need to know. Let's make the rest of this chat really pole specific. So when we're talking about grips on the pole, I guess there's two kind of movements that we can really do. Do you want to chat to everyone as to the key requirements of a grip?
Right. So when we're thinking about grip, like you've got your kind of your main grip, your true grip. It's just like as if you're grabbing hold of a baseball. That's your palm open, but fingers wrapped around the pole. And typically in your first class, learning to grab hold of the pole, that's where you're starting. And that's where the form is in what we call pronation. And so the palm is facing the pole and the fingers wrapped around it. So that's what you were thinking the first
yeah,
position.
I was even thinking more basic than that. I was thinking more I was thinking like pulling and pushing.
Oh, okay. Even before that.
I was very cryptic. I was trying to not give the answer away then, but but I wasn't doing a very good job of leading the conversation. I was more about when but you had it right, obviously. So when we're talking about beginners when they're first starting, we're talking about, you know, arm on the pole. It's all initially pulling strength. So
right, yes. Okay. So looking at it from that perspective, yeah, that true grip, that first one, is just about the pulling of the arm. And so on the flip side, when we get into some more advanced tricks, some more basic tricks, the opposite arm is often doing a pushing. And so it, you know, just like there's a balance between extensors and flexors, there's a balance in pull all the time with pushing and pulling, or pulling and pushing if I get my arms in the right position. And so, yeah, it's important to understand the grip requirements for that true grip, that pulling more versus a hand that's going to be doing more of the pushing.
Yeah. And it sounds so simple, but it's very helpful to think of tricks as that's a pull trick, double arm pull trick. That's a single arm pull and a single arm push trick, or that's a double arm push trick, or that's, you know, something weird or wonderful that I maybe haven't included. But they're the kind of three categories that we're looking at there is push, pull, or a combined grip movement, because that changes things. If you're moving your hands in the same direction, it generally makes the trick, I'm going to put in quotation marks, easier. Easier. If you're doing a combined movement, it's different demands, and so it can be a little bit more challenging on the wrist and the shoulder and forearms. So I think that's helpful to know. Yeah. And then when we go into so trick specifics, each trick and grip has their own different requirements. And so you're talking about you know, putting your forearm on the pole like a forearm brace position, you require pronation of the wrist. So if we talk about movements of the wrist, we have flexion, extension, supination. So supination, we think about holding a bowl of soup.
Yep. That's my memory too.
Yep. And then pronation's palm down. We have ulnar deviation, so that way. So pinky fingers going outwards, and then we have radial deviation. Okay, just to make sure everyone's orientated to movement there. So a lot of the grips that we use in pole, they put our wrists into different positions, and that's sometimes where issues can arise. So your thoughts on I guess passive loading of the joint with different, again, I'm being a bit cryptic, I'm trying to not give it away too much, but yeah, and I know you and I are on the same page with things, but your thoughts on compressive positions and passive positions of the wrist and pole, and what exactly that is and what it means for people out there.
Yeah. So think of when we're talking back around the anatomy, passive, you can think of it as a lot of those structures that are passively holding all those little bones together, like the ligaments. And then your active is your muscles doing a lot of that work to stabilize. So in, say, using that basic grip you learn when you're first starting, you're going to be pulling, you're going to be gripping that pull, and you're going to be using a lot of those active stabilizers of all your joints in your wrists, so your muscles, right? Now, there are some moves that then require more of our body weight to be held through a position of that wrist. And if we don't have the appropriate amount of active stability, so a lot of muscle strength, grip strength, then you're going to have to rely more on those passive structures to support you. And that's less ideal. So that about summarize it. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's it. So I think in terms of, and if your passive structures are loaded a little bit more, for some people that's completely fine. Their passive structures might be able to handle that load. For other people, it can become an issue.
Right.
For some people, it's not. It's a temporary issue in that their body sends out a warning signal, and that warning signal is pain. So they might not necessarily be injured, but at the time when they're pulling and they're loading their wrist up, they're noticing forearm pain or wrist pain, or when they're coming out of trick, they're noticing pain. And the pain disappears pretty much straight away. They don't notice it later that night or the next day. It doesn't come back until they pull again. And so that is quite often a warning signal for your body. And it's basically a really nice way of your body saying, hey, you're putting a lot of load through me, and you don't actually have the capacity to do this trick. Anyone who knows me in my workshops you'll see me quite frequently talk about load and capacity. So you always have to think about, when it comes to pole dance, how much load are we putting through our body, and does our body have the capacity to handle that load? If your load is greater than your capacity, you're setting yourself up for injury. Yeah. And if you do it, sorry, Kristine, if you do things like if you do it frequently enough and you load the wrist enough and it keeps on hurting, then yes, it may get injured. So it can increase your risk of injury in the short term and the long term. Yeah. Did you have something to add, sorry?
No, it's okay. I know you're very passionate about, identifying when it's good pain versus bad pain, right? So the way I always say it is, our bodies are really intelligent, and it's going to let you know when it's not happy with something. But the only way it can convey that message to you is through pain. So that's why pain to a lot of us might mean bad, red flags. But in those instances, like you said, where it's temporary, you kind of go, oh, that didn't feel great. And then it doesn't really come back. It goes away pretty quickly. It might have just been, hey, your body sending up a little warning, like, hey, can you move better, please? Or do better, be stronger.
Yeah.
But like you said, if it keeps coming back, then it's definitely a concern.
Yeah, you just raised a really good point in my mind, because we do talk about good pain versus bad pain a fair bit. And so say someone using the tips that we're going to outline in the rest of the session, if they use those tips and they're able to change the pain, it minimizes significantly or it goes away, then they're able to keep on pulling through that, right?
Yeah, totally.
Now, let's say someone uses the tips that doesn't change their pain, or it maybe changes a little bit of the pain, but not significantly enough. It's still quite present. And obviously it's very dependent on the individual, the pain level, and a few different things. Is it safe to keep pushing through this pain? Is it good pain? No, it's still a bad pain, isn't it?
Straight to the point. Yeah, no, that's probably when it's becoming more of the bad pain, right? So if your body can't overcome it, you've tried a few different tricks, that capacity is just not there, that's when it's worthwhile getting it looked at. So talking to a healthcare professional that especially has expertise in pole. And and then at the same time, like, when in doubt, you can always chat to someone as well.
Absolutely. I was going to say, so hopefully everyone by now understands and knows that we've got services out there available. So the wonderful Pole Physio team, our online services with Danielle, Jake and myself as training practitioners. So we're very happy to see you. But absolutely, if you are not able to change your pain in any way, shape or form through position modification, and your pain is there every time that you go to do a certain position, you absolutely should be getting it checked out. Or even if it's there only sometimes, but it's decent and it's not it's not relenting as a pain, and with the tricks, generally speaking, get it checked out, because it can end up a major issue in the long term. And when I say major, I do mean major. The wrist it's such a small cross-sectional area for the amount of load that we put through it. So what you saw in the pictures before, the muscles that sit on the back and the front, they provide all that support to such a tiny area, but you're seeing lots of tendons cross it. It's not a very bulky, actively supported area by heaps and heaps of muscles. It's mostly the tendons that control it. So whilst they're doing a fairly good job at providing active control and stability there, if we are exceeding that capacity, the risk of damage or injury at the wrist level can be quite high, and it can be quite considerable. It's one of those areas of the body that I do not muck around with, particularly with weight-bearing athletes. Yeah. So gymnasts, aerialists, pole dancers, we have to be really mindful of what's happening at our wrists. You're right, I am passionate about it. Just a little bit. Maybe it's the Italian Maltese coming out of me. My background is very passionate. So then in terms of we'll talk about a couple of specific grips on the pole. So we started off with a baseball straight grip, true grip position, which is where we're holding the pole like that, and where maybe our body's away from it, versus a stronghold grip where our body is tucked in. So your preparation to invert or straddle position. So they're both in a power grip, so holding the pole like that. That's what we call a power grip in the physio world. So that position there is a little bit different though on that bottom wrist compared to that position when the arm's out a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah. So I mean, always when your body is closer to the pole and your arms are closer to your body, that's more strength for you, in a sense that if you think about physics that I was never good at in school, if you think of levers, then if your arms are further away from your body, that's going to be more effort for a lot of those active structures and passive. So yeah, you were talking about that bottom arm in a strong hold. I know this looks awkward on this.
So that position holds on the inside of your armpit.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, that wrist is in what we call more ulnar deviation. So it does look like it would be more of a stressful spot, but you are in a double pulling position, so that's quite strong, hence the name stronghold. And it's not so passively hanging into that side of the wrist. It's more active, like we say.
Yeah. And so if we put our wrist into passive compression, so lots of ulnar deviation, that's quite a common position in pole dance that we end up in that. There are situations where if we're able to compensate beautifully with our muscles, that's not an issue. That's okay to put ourselves into that end of range position. And we call it compressive. Compressive doesn't mean pain. It just means that it's literally end of range compression. So bone is limited by bone. We cannot physically push it any further. But there are some situations where we put ourselves into compression and it does increase our risk of injury if we're not strong enough to stabilize. And so that stronghold position, not so much of an issue usually, but if it is an issue for some people out there, maybe consider putting your hands in a slightly different position. First of all, hands should be a bit higher than what I was demonstrating as opposed to down. That's if you're inverting like that, that's a no-no. That's definitely going to cause pain. But if you're a bit higher up, that will help. So you can see how I'm in less ulnar deviation. I'm more in a bit more of a neutral position if I've got my wrists a little bit higher. Yeah. So then the next one is a half bracket grip. Or the chair spin grip is probably what people know it as. So one arm reaching up nice and high, other arm across the body. So this is our pull and our push, so a combined movement. What are your thoughts in terms of wrist position and anatomy there?
Yeah, so you think top arm still in that true grip, so very low risk, not very common area for injury there. Yeah, you need a fair amount of that pull strength still. But that bottom arm being a pushing arm is providing you a good amount of stability, and it's in that cross-body neutral position. You're not coming down or up with it if you've got it in the right spot.
So we just have to contend with gravity in that position, really. So as long as we're pulling with our top arm enough in that position, then we're not going to put too much load through the wrist in an uncomfortable way. So as long as we're pulling enough and pushing enough, the wrists are usually quite happy there.
Yeah.
The progressive position from that is our split grip or our full bracket grip position, which is the grip that's used for gemillas, which we're currently featuring on the anatomy series of Pole Physio. And so we talk a little bit about wrist pain on the series. One of our posts have covered it, but let's talk about this position and why it might not be the favorite of a beginner when they're first learning.
So again, it's a push and pull. So again, that top arm's doing all the pulling, the bottom is doing all the pulling. I think again about the leverage required. Now that bottom arm is no longer in like more of a neutral position. It's extended further from our body. And then you are going to be more in that ulnar deviated position if you place that wrist in that position. And if we don't have the strength, thank you, great demo there. If we don't have the strength to support ourselves in that bottom arm, then you're going to be falling, if you will, passively into those structures. Yeah, great demo.
Try to demo with a plastic spear here. So that is not ideal to be holding your wrist into that position whilst you're doing something like a gemella or a split grip. That's a lot of gravity that goes through that area. And there are a few structures there that then end up taking a lot of passive load. Unless you are, again, a really experienced pole dancer, got a lot of upper body strength to take the pressure off. This is why a lot of beginners, when they're taught something like a gemella or a tuck spin, really struggle with it. And they really struggle with pain in that area, or the next place they feel it is the forearm, which we'll chat about later. So it all is very similar. And so there are some people out there when they're beginners that are suitable to do something like a gemella or a tuck spin. Tuck spin probably less of a concern, but a gemella, some beginners are suitable, but I would even suggest that as a move, that something like our gemella should actually be left to your low intermediate levels or high beginner levels, depending on studios and so forth, once they've mastered, and say mastered, the ability to push and pull independently with different arms in different variations, or they should be conditioned appropriately. If you're going to bring them into a gemella, I've seen gemellas being brought in the first term of a pole dancer's career, and it can be quite disastrous. So or tuck spins being brought in fairly early on, and it can be an issue because they don't really know how to use their bodies yet. So the way we fix that is with changing the wrist position, isn't it?
Yeah. So again, being that ulnar deviated position can be quite strenuous on that inside part of the wrist. The little tip is to think, if you point your index finger down the pole, that'll already bring you back up into a neutral position more so. So that's the first thing you can do to create less passive load through that inside border of the wrist.
So I'm just trying to get it so the green screen doesn't oh, there. Not like that, like that. So just that little change from that position there takes me out of lots of ulnar deviation on this side, which you can't see, and that makes it a little bit more neutral. It helps to put me in a better position. Sorry, this is not working. I tried. I did try. So less of that, more like that, basically. Less that. Yeah. So pointing your finger down the pole can be very helpful for people. It might not be helpful for people who have injuries to their finger, who might need modifications on that, particularly those who are extremely hypermobile and experience pain secondary to that. Most of the time, 9.9 times out of 10, it's suitable for most people. So I think that it is a really easy way and it's a really simple way. And I think instructors should be cueing when they're teaching that particular grip. I think they should be cueing to point down the pole, generally speaking, which that's kind of one of the first tips that I've kind of skipped ahead, but it's one of the first tips that we can work on when trying to improve wrist pain when poling. There was one grip I did want to talk about still, that's a little bit more of an advanced grip, and it's your twisted grip. Has a little bit of a different biomechanics setup than the grips we've talked about before. So we're now talking about the top arm as opposed to the bottom arm. So twisted grip requires a bit of a different movement, doesn't it?
Yeah. So typically the shoulder is above, well, you can't see so well, above head, and we're in more of that pronated grip, again, palm facing the pole. But then with the twisted grip, the whole shoulder has to go into more internal rotation, which then actually creates more of that supinated grip position, which just looks awkward. Of course, me even trying to show you. Now, there's a lot of worry about that position because it can put the shoulder into more vulnerable position. And it's only really then a concern if we don't have the capacity, like we've talked about, to tolerate it.
Yeah.
So both range of motion and strength being the most important things to decide whether you have the capacity to do it.
Yeah. We won't talk about the shoulder today because it's very complicated. We've got a whole workshop on it.
Yeah.
Coming out again later this year at some point, the Save Your Shoulders workshop. But it's there's so much in it, and those who attended last year will know exactly what I'm talking about. There's so much. So in terms of the wrist, when we're talking about twisted grip, if we're lacking shoulder internal rotation, or if we're lacking forearm pronation, then the next structure that may be affected is the actual wrist joint, and it will take a passive load through that, and that can be quite uncomfortable. So that may be a factor as to why you're experiencing pain in the wrist specifically when you're in twisted grip. It could also be a reason why you're experiencing shoulder pain and so forth. It's less common to be a shoulder issue, more likely to be a wrist issue. So that is one of the things. And then you need to work with a healthcare professional on improving your shoulder or forearm ability to assist with your twisted grip there.
Yeah, because the thing when it comes to the wrist really is because it's 1, 2, 3 joints down the line. If we are lacking what we say proximal stability, so strength in and around the shoulder, and then subsequently the elbow, forearm, then the body loves to find ways to compensate and get that mobility and our strength through the wrist. And that's where pain comes along.
Absolutely. Yeah. So our top tips on improving wrist pain whilst poling, and when we're talking wrist pain, we're not talking about injury, we're talking about pain that you get in something like a gemella specifically, or a split grip position. So we've already given away number 1, which is change the wrist from a ulnar deviated position to a neutral position on the pole. What's number 2?
Number 2 is thinking about the distance from like where that bottom arm is from your body. So you want to actually think about reaching fairly low down the pole. The reason for that is there's a couple of things, but when we're talking about just the wrist, if the wrist is fairly close to the body, and again, this is awkward for me to show you, then you're going to be in a fair amount of wrist extension, which is quite difficult. It's a quite difficult position to be in. And so that's going to change. If you think about how muscles work best when they're in a certain length, they don't work as strong if they are super stretched or if they're super compressed. So if they're super stretched, our forearm flexors, the ones we said create a lot of our grip strength. And so then you won't feel as strong in that position, and or you won't rely so much on that active strength, and you'll end up again in that passive support structures in the wrist. So by dropping the wrist further down, picture me reaching down the pole, that's now brought me out of so much wrist extension.
My position on the pole up here, basically down straighter, you can see that I'm less in wrist extension on the pole. I'm a bit more in a neutral position compared to that on the pole. Yeah. So I think that's a really simple thing to do. Basically slide your hand down, and it might feel awkward when you're first starting, but you'll see how much more comfortable that feels to drop your arm lower. If you're in a lot of wrist extension, it increases that compression as well through the wrist. So it takes you into that end of range extension, which then can load up the passive support structures. 2 more tips that we've got. These are simple tips and almost too simple. And they really go hand in hand with each other. So I'm happy for you to say them together if you'd like.
Cool. Yeah, that's what I think too. So I think working up the arm. So we talked about where that wrist, where the finger is to create neutral wrist, and then reaching the arm to create less extended wrist. And then think, again, that balancing act between push and pull. If that top arm isn't pulling enough, then you're going to rely a lot heavier on that bottom arm. And then if you're not pushing enough out of that bottom arm, you're going to then passively rely on that wrist. So again, the best tips you can think about for that position is pull more through that top arm, push more through the bottom arm.
And build your strength. So that's, if you feel like I'm pushing, I'm pulling, I'm still happening, still getting pain, and I'm trying, I promise I'm trying, then see one of us and we can help you build your wrist strength appropriate to what's, missing in your wrist. That's the key.
Totally.
Okay, so we've already spoken about we get pain as opposed to injury. So there's a difference between, I guess, pain in a trick where you're like, oh, this hurts, and you come out and then there's no pain for days. That's not an injury. That's just pain. Versus, injury can be prolonged pain, and it might be prolonged, meaning for a couple of hours after you pole, so it's not even for a long period of time, or it might be later that night, it might be the next day, so there might be gaps in between it, but any pain related to you poling then whilst you're not poling is considered an injury, and you can obviously still have an injury and be poling as well. So it gets a little bit complicated in terms of definition there, but I just want to explain that if you're experiencing pain in the trick and it stops, you may be injured, but it may also just be that protective sign that we spoke about before. And it's that protective response that's secondary to your body wanting to protect itself because you may not have enough capacity. And that also has to do with the forearm as well. So I've been speaking about the wrist, but a lot of people get that horrible forearm sensation when they're coming out of like a Jamila or a tuck position, and it's secondary to not having enough active capacity through the wrist forearm area and potentially the top arm pulling strength or the bottom arm pushing strength. There's something missing, and therefore your forearm is being loaded to extremes and it's not happy. So those sort of things, check your position, and if it's still not improving, see one of us and we can help. So keeping in mind the difference between being injured and pain experience, so we've got a couple of quick exercises that we wanted to show everyone who's watching. These exercises are for those who are not injured. So I'm leaving it up to everyone watching to figure out whether you're injured or not. An injury can be mild pain. It can be a chronic niggle that you experience, like a 1 or 2 out of 10, but it's ongoing. That's injury. It doesn't have to be 10 out of 10 pain for it to be injury versus someone who only gets pain whilst they're doing the trick. So here is some exercises that Kristine and I chose before, and some of you may recognize the exercises. They have been a part of our Jamila series. So we've got the gorgeous Mishka demonstrating for us. So this is a modified split grip position. So this is certainly not for anyone who's in pain. This is for someone who wants to get stronger in their split grip. So we're bringing it back to this particular move because it's the hardest thing to do. When we're in a split grip, it's really hard to control strength, and to build strength. So this is taking away some of your body weight by putting yourself on the ground. So you'll see here that, and this is sped up a little bit, so Mish has not done it this fast in real life. You'll see that she has, bring it back to start, put the weight through her toes there, fair bit, and then pulling and pushing with the bottom arm. Their progression for that particular movement would actually be to then flatten the toes down. So reduce the amount of weight that the foot's taking. The next progression is what's shown here on a slider or a towel, and you're pushing away. So again, a really nice way to strengthen that push and pull with that top and bottom arm. So they are really nice modified positions that we wanted to show you today. For those who are injured, please do not try that. That is not for you. If you are injured and you're experiencing pain post-poling or during poling that's not settling down with positional changes, you are injured and you need to see someone. So for those of you who are injured, we have, like I mentioned before, appointments with our gorgeous healthcare team that are happy to see you, and it might only take a couple of sessions to get you on your way, but those sessions can prevent long-term injury and potentially quite significant issues in the future. So definitely get on top of pain as soon as you possibly can. I know that pretty much is everything that we wanted to chat about today, Kristine. Is there anything that you wanted to add there? Is any last take-home messages that people should know?
I guess the thing about wrists and grip strength and all those things is it can be very from my experience working with other individuals and myself, it can be disheartening sometimes because you can get to the pole in class, and you just feel like, why don't I have that strength? So just have patience with it, and maybe you just have to look at exploring other opportunities to create strength. So whether it's on pole conditioning or off pole conditioning, there's a million and one ways to strengthen your active stability for your wrist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, and you've written some fabulous blogs for our team. So if anyone who's interested, make sure you go check them out. You've written 2 blogs on grips and holds. So if you go into our blog page, into the search function, if you type in grips and holds, then you'll see the 2 blogs. I mean, you've written more than 2 blogs, but 2 fabulous ones on grips and holds. So one for the upper limb and one for the lower limb. So they're both on there, and they're free access for people to check out if you're interested in knowing the different demands and positions and requirements of a whole bunch of different tricks and grips that we use as pole dancers.
Yeah. Right. And if you stay tuned, then I'll be doing a part 3 vlog with some more strength and conditioning ideas for your grip and holds in pole.
Yes, absolutely. And that, again, for pain-free polers out there. So for anyone who's experiencing pain or injury, please come and see us and we will sort you out. On that note, I think we've done well in terms of time. So I'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Kristine, for joining me today. Appreciate your company and for sharing your knowledge with the pole and aerial community.
Yeah.
So
cheers. Thank you.
Cheers. Cutest mug. I love it. Hope everyone has a lovely rest of your day and you've enjoyed today's presentation. Make sure you stay tuned for our next event, which will be dropping soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.